The air hummed with the distant roar of energy blasts, the crackling of plasma fire, and the pounding march of boots on the jagged terrain. The battlefield stretched out before her, an endless, unforgiving wasteland where death and destruction were the only constants. Tessa, a soldier of the Zilloran military, was no stranger to the chaos of war. Her people, an advanced alien race known for their ruthless efficiency, had been fighting the humans for years, each battle bringing them closer to total victory. But today something felt different. She adjusted the straps on her battle armor, her gauntlets clicking into place. The heat from the sun above made the air thick, but there was no time to worry about the weather. Her squad was advancing toward a human-held outpost, a strategic position that needed to be taken. The mission was simple: infiltrate, disable the defenses, and eliminate the enemy. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the thrill of battle. The Zilloran were known for their ferocity, and Tessa was one of their best warriors. She had trained her entire life for moments like this. The humans would not stand a chance. They never did. Squad, stay alert. Tessa's commanding officer, Lieutenant Vulcan, barked over the comm. Were nearing their lines. Expect resistance. The sound of the squad's footsteps was the only noise as they moved in sync, their boots pounding the ground in perfect harmony. The small group of soldiers, each equipped with sleek, advanced weaponry, pressed forward with purpose. Tessa's mind was sharp, her senses heightened. Her eyes scanned the horizon, looking for movement. She could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline, the anticipation of battle filling her veins. But then, something changed. A sudden crack of gunfire broke the silence, followed by a massive explosion from the right. Tessa's eyes snapped to the source of the blast. It was too late. The ground beneath her feet shifted violently as an explosion erupted from the earth itself, sending a wave of heat and smoke into the sky. Tessa's helmet flickered as her vision blurred from the shockwave, her body thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. Pain exploded in her leg. She screamed, but the sound was lost beneath the chaos of the battlefield. Her leg, her strongest weapon, was gone. The blast had severed it just above the knee, and the pain was unbearable. Her armor's damaged systems flashed red, but she barely had the strength to process it. Blood poured from the wound, soaking the ground beneath her. Squad, get to her. Vulcan's voice was distant, muffled by the ringing in Tessa's ears. She could barely see him through the smoke and debris, but she could hear his orders. She knew they were coming, but she didn't have time. She had no time. Her vision started to fade as the world spun around her. Tessa's breath came in shallow gasps. Her body felt heavier, her consciousness slipping like sand through her fingers. This was it. She was going to die here, on this alien planet, far from home. The thought brought no sense of relief, only an overwhelming sadness. She had failed her people. She had failed herself. The sound of heavy boots reached her ears, and then a voice. It wasn't Vulcan's. The voice was unfamiliar, but it was close, so close. Her fading mind tried to process it, but it felt like a distant echo. Hang on, the voice said, low and steady. I've got you. Tessa's eyes fluttered open, but the world around her was a blur. She tried to move, but her body wouldn't respond. Her leg, her missing leg, was a dull ache, a gnawing pain that threatened to pull her back into unconsciousness. Easy, the voice said again. It was calm, authoritative. A human voice. Tessa's eyes tried to focus, and she saw a figure leaning over her. A human. His face was partially obscured by the faceplate of his helmet, but she could see his eyes, focused, determined. He was working quickly, but with a practiced precision. A medic. What are you doing? Tessa's voice cracked, weak and hoarse. She tried to lash out, but her body betrayed her. I'm saving your life, the medic said, his tone unwavering. Stay still. You've lost a lot of blood. I need to stop the bleeding. Tessa's eyes flickered with disbelief. You're human. Last time I checked, he said, his lips twitching into a faint smile. Now hold on. You're going to be fine. Tessa tried to process his words, but her head was clouded. The shock of her injury, the rapid blood loss, and the sheer surprise of a human being the one to save her, it didn't make sense. The humans were the enemy. They were the ones who had taken so much from her people, the ones who had forced them to fight for their very survival. Why are you helping me? Tessa gasped. The medic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced ease as he applied a tourniquet to her wound. His voice was steady as he spoke again, this time with a hint of calm reassurance. Because every life has value, and I don't leave anyone behind. Her mind spun. This wasn't right. Humans didn't save aliens, especially not soldiers from the Zilliran military. They were supposed to be enemies, locked in an eternal struggle for survival. There was no compassion in war, no mercy, and yet, here he was, a human, saving her life, despite everything. Tessa's vision blurred again as the medic finished applying bandages to her wound. The last thing she remembered was his voice, his calm presence amidst the chaos, and the strange warmth that spread through her chest despite the pain. "Stay with me," the medic urged, his voice soft but firm. "You're not alone." The world around Tessa faded once again, but this time, there was no fear. Only a strange, unfamiliar sense of comfort that she couldn't explain. The battlefields were a blur of fire and smoke, and the medic had grown used to it. Sergeant Daniel Hayes, known simply as Doc to his team, had seen it all. He had seen men and women, human and alien, mangle and die in ways that would haunt most people forever. He had treated injuries no one should ever have to endure. But each time he picked up his medkit, he did so with a quiet resolve. It was his job, his calling, to heal, not to harm. Doc stood at the edge of the encampment, looking out over the makeshift battlefield. His team was preparing for a rescue mission. Somewhere out there were soldiers, both human and alien, injured, stranded, waiting to be found. His job was to bring them back, to patch them up and send them back to their respective sides, or, if they were lucky, to save their lives. "Doc, you ready?" a voice called out. Doc turned to see Lieutenant Rebecca Bex Malone, a trusted member of his team, strapping on her gear. She gave him a pointed look. "You look like you've been up all night." "I have," Doc replied. "I'm used to it." His voice was dry, tired, but steady. It had been a long stretch without rest, but this wasn't the time for fatigue to take over. He had a job to do. Bex raised an eyebrow. "We all need to get some sleep. The war's not going to be won on exhaustion." Doc nodded, though his gaze never wavered from the horizon. "You know as well as I do, Bex. We get those soldiers back, we save them. If we can, then we rest. Right now, they need us." Bex sighed but didn't argue. Instead, she checked the small, makeshift map they'd been given of the battlefield. The coordinates were vague, but they knew where to start looking. Doc had been on rescue missions like this before, swooping in behind enemy lines, rescuing both allies and enemies when needed, saving the wounded regardless of their allegiance. He had never questioned it. No one had. "We'll find them," Bex said, checking her rifle one last time. "Let's hope so," Doc muttered. "Let's hope so." The journey across the barren landscape was exhausting. The team moved in silence, alert to any movement. The landscape had been devastated by both sides. Alien technology had cracked open the earth, leaving scars of molten rock and dust, while human artillery had turned the plains into an unrecognizable wasteland. The sound of distant gunfire was constant, but it didn't seem to get any closer. A quiet tension hung in the air, like the calm before a storm. Doc led the group, his eyes scanning the terrain, his mind working through the various scenarios of what they might find. Would they encounter more wounded soldiers? Or would they be walking straight into an ambush? He couldn't afford to dwell on the latter. It would only slow him down. The communication device in his ear crackled to life. "Doc, we found something." Beck's voice came through. "It's an alien." Doc's heart skipped a beat. They had received reports of downed alien soldiers, but encountering one in this condition meant they were deep within enemy territory. "I'll be there in 5, he replied, urging his team to move faster. Minutes later, the squad reached the coordinates Bex had given. Tessa's body lay partially hidden behind a pile of rubble. The human soldiers had carefully avoided drawing attention as they moved closer, but there was no mistaking the sight of the alien soldier, tall, armored, and vulnerable, her life hanging in the balance. Doc knelt beside her immediately, surveying the damage. Her armor was charred from the blast, her leg a mangled mess. The bleeding was severe, and the ground beneath her was soaked in dark blood. She was barely conscious, her breath ragged and shallow. "She's still alive, but not for long if we don't get her stabilized," Doc muttered. His mind immediately switched into medical mode. working through the list of things he needed to do to save her. Bex crouched down next to him. You sure about this? She's an enemy soldier. Document. Doesn't matter, Doc replied, his voice unwavering. She's human in the sense that she has a life. And I'll be damned if I let anyone die out here, no matter what side they're on. Bex seemed to think about it for a moment before nodding. Got your back, document. Doc got to work quickly. His medkit was packed with the latest technology, a combination of human and alien medical advancements. He had everything he needed to save her, if only he could stay focused. His hands moved quickly, applying pressure to the wound on her leg, stopping the bleeding. But even as he worked, his mind kept returning to the fact that this was an alien soldier. His enemy. The very species that had been killing humans for years. But none of that mattered when you were holding someone's life in your hands. The medic's voice was calm, reassuring, even though his thoughts were anything but. Stay with me, he murmured as he worked, trying to keep her from slipping into unconsciousness. The alien soldier, Tessa, groaned, her eyes flickering open for a moment before closing again. Her voice came out hoarse and weak, barely a whisper. Why are you doing this? Because you matter, Doc said, his tone soft but firm. You matter to me, and you matter to the world. You have a chance to make it out of here. Don't waste it. Tessa's eyes opened again, this time with more clarity. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling with pain, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of confusion and disbelief. How could a human, an enemy, care? It didn't make sense. She had been trained to kill, to destroy humanity. The thought of saving one of their kind, especially her, was incomprehensible. Doc didn't have time to explain. He focused on stopping the bleeding, using the advanced bandages and medical tools at his disposal to seal the wound. Her leg would never be the same, but it could be saved, and with time, she could recover. His calm demeanor never faltered as he worked, though inside, he couldn't help but wonder how this war would ever end. In the back of his mind, Doc had always held on to the belief that saving lives, any lives, was the only true victory. But in that moment, as he worked on the alien soldier, he wondered if there would ever be a time when the bloodshed would stop. He had never been naive enough to believe the war was over, but seeing one of the enemy's best warriors lying there, wounded and vulnerable, it stirred something deep inside him. It made him think, what if it didn't have to be this way? Stay with me, he repeated, his voice steady despite the internal storm. You're going to make it. Just hang on. Doc finished his work and called in for extraction. Tessa's vital signs were stable, but he knew the real battle for her survival had only just begun. They would have to move quickly, but for now, they had made it. She was alive. As they prepared to carry her back to safety, Doc couldn't help but look at her, at the alien soldier who had once been his enemy, but who now owed him her life. Could she ever look at him the same way? And if the day ever came when they would stand on opposite sides of the battlefield again, would she remember this moment? Would she remember that humans could save lives, even when it seemed impossible? The thought lingered in his mind as he turned his gaze back to the horizon. Tessa's world was a blur, spinning between moments of clarity and utter blackness. The pain in her leg, once a searing fire, had faded to a dull throb, but she was still conscious enough to realize she was being moved. The sensation of being carried was foreign to her, like being cradled in the arms of an enemy medic, no less. She wanted to protest, to scream at him to let her go, to leave her to die on the battlefield where she belonged. But the words wouldn't come. The human had saved her life. That much was clear. But why? That question echoed in her mind as she tried to summon the strength to fight back, to understand the twisted logic that led a human to save an alien soldier. The pain in her leg was unbearable, but it was nothing compared to the pain of her shattered beliefs. In war, there was no room for mercy, no place for compassion. And yet, the human had treated her wound as though she were just another soldier, just another person. His hands had been gentle, his voice calm. He had cared for her as though her life mattered. Tessa's thoughts were fragmented, slipping in and out of focus. But one thing was clear. Everything she had been taught to believe about the enemy, about humans, was now in question. When Tessa regained consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the smell. The air was thick with antiseptic and unfamiliar herbs, a stark contrast to the acrid stench of smoke and burning flesh she had grown accustomed to. Her eyes opened slowly, the world still hazy, but she could make out the dim shapes of a medical tent. The sound of soft murmurs and the rustling of equipment filled the air, and for a moment, she wondered if she had died and gone to some strange, sterile afterlife. Then, she saw him, the human medic, standing over her, his face no longer obscured by the helmet. His short brown hair was tousled, and his dark eyes were focused on a small data pad in his hands. He didn't seem surprised to see her awake, but there was a hint of curiosity in his gaze, as though he too were wondering how long she would survive, how long her body would hold out under the strain of her injuries. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm measured. Tessa blinked a few times, trying to make sense of the words. Why are you doing this?" she croaked, her throat dry. The words felt foreign coming from her, and she hated the weakness in her voice. The medic didn't answer right away. Instead, he set the data pad down on a nearby table and moved closer, adjusting the bandages on her leg. She tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The pain was sharp, a reminder of her helplessness. She didn't want his touch, didn't want his care, but it was clear that she had no choice. "Because I don't believe in leaving people to die," he said simply, his hands steady as they worked. "You're hurt. I'm going to make sure you're okay." "Why?" Tessa repeated, her voice stronger this time. She couldn't understand it. He had saved her life, an enemy soldier. Was this some kind of trick? A tactic to get her to lower her guard? Or was it a deeper form of manipulation? The questions burned in her mind, but she had no answers. The human looked up from her wound and met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. "In war, we don't stop being human. You're not just a soldier, Tessa. You're a person." Her heart skipped a beat at the sound of her name. He knew who she was. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. She had always been just a soldier, just another weapon in the war against humanity. She had never considered herself anything more than that, until now. Until this human medic, who had just saved her life, treated her like something more than an enemy. Tessa shook her head, her mind spinning. "You don't understand," she murmured. "I'm your enemy. I'm the one who—" "I know who you are," he interrupted gently, his voice still calm. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're still a person. You're still someone who deserves a chance. No one should have to die in this kind of pain." Tessa's mind reeled. She had been taught her entire life that humans were nothing more than inferior, chaotic beings. They had no honor, no compassion. Their only purpose was to fight, to destroy, to take what didn't belong to them. But this human, this medic, was different. He was proving everything she had been taught wrong. She wanted to lash out, to deny him, to tell him that his kindness meant nothing in the face of the war. But she couldn't. There was no venom in her voice anymore, no anger. Just a deep, growing confusion. "I've seen the things you've done to my people," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "I've seen the destruction, the bloodshed. Why should I trust you?" The medic didn't flinch. His expression remained steady, unwavering. "I'm not asking you to trust me," he said. "I'm asking you to trust the fact that, right now, I'm doing everything I can to keep you alive. That's all I can do. And that's all I'm going to do." As the days passed, Tessa's recovery was slow but steady. The human medic, who she now knew was named Daniel Hayes, continued to care for her. He was methodical in his treatment, always there when she needed him, always calm, always patient. He never once treated her like a prisoner, never once tried to force her to talk or to change her views. Instead, he allowed her to watch him, to learn from him. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were filled with empathy and understanding. They didn't speak about the war. Not yet. Instead, they focused on her healing, on her physical recovery. But with each passing day, something inside her began to shift. She had been trained to believe that humans were nothing more than beasts, incapable of compassion, driven only by the need to conquer. But this human, this medic, had shattered that belief. Every moment she spent with him, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known. Was war really the answer? Was the destruction of her people justified? And if so, what had she been fighting for? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. She could no longer look at the world the way she had before. One evening, as Daniel finished tending to her leg, he sat down beside her on the cot, wiping his brow with a rag. Tessa studied him, watching the way his eyes flickered with weariness, how the lines of stress marked his face. He looked as though the weight of the war had already aged him beyond his years. Yet, there was a kindness in his gaze, a deep well of compassion that she couldn't reconcile with the soldier she had once been. "You're not like the others," Tessa said quietly. Her voice was rough from days of silence, but it carried weight now. Daniel looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You're not like the humans I've fought," she clarified. "You don't hate me. You don't want to see me dead." "What?" Daniel's expression softened. "Because you're not my enemy," he said simply. "Not in the way the war makes us think. You're someone who deserves a chance to live. We all do." Tessa couldn't find the words to respond. She didn't know how to express the confusion swirling inside her. The emotions she had suppressed for so long, hatred, anger, fear, were giving way to something else. A quiet, unexpected feeling of gratitude. For the first time since the war had begun, she wasn't sure who the real enemy was. The days blurred together as Tessa's recovery continued. She was no longer fighting to stay alive. Now, she was fighting the overwhelming confusion that seemed to cloud her mind at every turn. The medic, Daniel Hayes, had become a constant presence in her life. His quiet compassion had slowly broken down the walls she had built up over years of war, and with each passing hour, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known. The enemy was no longer the faceless monster she had been taught to fear. Daniel had proven that. He was human, yes, but he was more than that. He was a man who had chosen to save her life, someone who refused to let a fellow soldier die, regardless of their allegiance. And that kindness had wormed its way into her heart, slowly but surely. But there was still a wall between them, one that she wasn't sure could be broken down. She was an alien soldier, a warrior who had been bred for combat, trained to conquer, to destroy. She couldn't just forget everything she had been taught. And yet, as the days went on, it became harder to ignore the undeniable truth that had taken root inside her. She had been wrong about humans. It was a quiet afternoon when the breakthrough finally came. Daniel had just finished another round of checking her wound, ensuring the bandages were still secure and that her leg was healing properly. As he packed away his medical supplies, Tessa watched him from the cot. Her thoughts were tumultuous, swirling in a constant whirl of doubt and uncertainty. "You've been quiet lately," Daniel said, breaking the silence. He was putting his medkit back in order, but he was still acutely aware of her presence. "Is something on your mind?" Tessa hesitated. She had been avoiding the question he had asked her several days ago, the question that had begun to crack open her worldview. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she confessed, her voice quieter than she intended. Daniel didn't respond immediately, but she could tell he was waiting for her to continue, to elaborate. "I've been trained my entire life to hate your kind," she said, each word heavy with the weight of the indoctrination that had shaped her since childhood. "I've been taught that humans are nothing but savages, incapable of honor, driven only by greed. That we, my people, are superior." Her voice faltered slightly as she spoke, the words feeling hollow even as they left her mouth. It was like hearing someone else's voice, someone who had long since abandoned the beliefs that she had once held so fiercely. Daniel nodded, his expression softening. "I understand. Word is that to people. It makes us see the other side as less than human. It's easier to fight a monster than a person." Tessa's brow furrowed. "But you," she stopped herself. "You're not like what I thought you'd be. You're not just some mindless soldier. You've treated me like I matter." Daniel didn't flinch at her words. "That's because you do matter," he said simply. "War makes us forget that sometimes. It makes us forget that every person, every soldier, has a life worth living." Tessa was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the floor. She could feel her heart beating faster, a strange tightness in her chest. There was something about his words that felt like a revelation. She had never heard anyone, especially a human, talk like this before. "You don't hate me," she said, almost as if testing the words, seeing if they held any truth. "No," Daniel replied, his voice steady, yet filled with an earnestness that struck her to the core. "I don't. I know you've fought against us, and I know you've been trained to kill us. But that doesn't mean I hate you. I don't even know you." Tessa blinked, her confusion growing. "Then why save me? Why risk everything for an enemy?" Daniel took a deep breath, as though he were trying to put words to something he hadn't yet fully understood. "Because I believe in something more than this war. I believe that if we have the chance to save someone, to stop the cycle of violence, then we should take it. I don't want to be part of the endless hatred. I want to believe there's more to us than just killing." His words hung in the air, a silent challenge to the world they had both come from. For the first time since the war had started, Tessa felt the cold grip of her loyalty to her people start to loosen, just a little. She didn't know what to make of it. Could she really abandon everything she had been taught? Could she really just turn her back on the only purpose she had ever known? Everything in her screamed that it was wrong, that she had to fight, that she had to resist this feeling, this growing connection with a human. But something inside her was different now, and she couldn't deny it. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to change everything I've ever believed." Daniel smiled, the expression gentle, kind. "You don't have to change everything. You just have to let go of the hate. Let go of the need to see yourself as a weapon, as a soldier who's nothing but a tool for destruction. You're more than that, Tessa." Tessa's chest tightened at his words, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider the possibility that she could be more than what she had been trained to be. Maybe she wasn't just a soldier. Maybe, deep down, there was something more. A person who could choose to heal instead of hurt, to save instead of destroy. "I never thought I could be more than this," she murmured. "But maybe you're right." In the days that followed, the bond between them deepened, though neither of them spoke of it directly. Tessa's leg was healing, but the emotional scars were proving to be more difficult to treat. Still, she found herself looking at Daniel not as an enemy, but as someone who had shown her the possibility of a different way of life, a life that wasn't defined by bloodshed and hatred. She couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the world than the endless cycle of war, if peace could one day become more than just a distant dream. For the first time, Tessa allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. And it started with a single human medic who had chosen to save her life. Days turned into weeks, and Tessa's body slowly healed. The pain in her leg, once a constant, nagging reminder of her near-death experience, had faded. But it wasn't just her physical wounds that had begun to heal. Her heart, once hardened by the brutal realities of war, had begun to soften, to question, to reconsider everything she thought she knew about the world. And it was all because of Daniel Hayes. The medic, the human who had shown her a side of humanity she had never believed possible, had become her anchor in the storm of confusion that had followed her injury. She had never imagined that a single person could challenge everything she had been taught, everything she had fought for. But Daniel had done just that. He had done more than save her life. He had opened her eyes. But as Tessa's recovery progressed, so too did the reality of her situation. The war was still raging outside the confines of the medical tent. Her people, the ones who had once been her comrades, were still fighting for control. And Tessa, despite everything, was still an enemy soldier. There was no escaping the conflict, no escaping the war that had shaped her entire existence. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky outside the tent turned a deep, bruised purple, Tessa found herself staring out of the flap, lost in thought. The weight of the war, of her place in it, was pressing on her chest once more. She had grown to care about Daniel, had even begun to question her allegiance to the empire she had served for so long. But what did that mean? Could she really betray everything she had known? Could she betray her people? "Tessa." Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, his footsteps soft on the dirt floor as he entered the tent. His dark eyes studied her with a quiet intensity, as though sensing the turmoil that was brewing inside her. Tessa turned to face him, the familiar pang of conflict gnawing at her heart. "I've been thinking," she began slowly, her voice distant. "About everything. About the war. About you." Daniel nodded, his expression open and patient, as if waiting for her to continue. "I don't know who I am anymore," she confessed, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't know if I can keep fighting for my people. I don't know if I can keep being the soldier I was. But if I don't fight for them, what am I? Where do I go?" Daniel was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady as he considered her words. "I think that's the hardest question to answer," he said softly. "Who are you when everything you've been taught, everything you've been trained to do, no longer feels right? I don't know the answer for you, Tessa. But I know this. You don't have to be defined by your past. You can be more than just a soldier." Tessa's breath caught in her throat. His words stirred something deep inside her. She had always believed that her worth was tied to her role as a soldier, as a weapon in a war that seemed endless. But now, for the first time, she was beginning to see that there might be a different path, one that didn't involve bloodshed, one that didn't require her to keep fighting a war that she no longer believed in. "I don't know if I can stop fighting," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've been." Daniel stepped closer, his hand reaching out to rest on her shoulder. The touch was gentle, reassuring, a silent offer of support. "I don't expect you to have all the answers, Tessa. No one does. But I think you need to ask yourself what you really want. Do you want to keep fighting a war that only brings pain and destruction? Or do you want to build something different? Something better?" His words hung in the air, a challenge, an invitation, and Tessa found herself unable to answer. What could she say? Could she truly leave everything behind? Could she walk away from the only life she had ever known? The answer wasn't easy. In fact, it felt impossible. But as she looked into Daniel's eyes, something inside her stirred. It was small, a flicker of hope, but it was enough to make her question everything. The next day, Tessa made a decision. It wasn't a perfect decision, and it wasn't an easy one, but it was hers. She had spent days wrestling with the truth she had tried to avoid for so long. The war had stolen so much from her, so much from both sides. But it had also shown her something else. The possibility of change, the possibility of a future where she didn't have to be a soldier, where she didn't have to be defined by the endless cycle of violence and hatred. When Daniel found her in the medical tent later that evening, she was standing by the window, her back to him. The sun had set, and the stars had begun to appear, each one a distant reminder of the vastness of the universe and how small she felt in it. "I've made a choice," she said without turning around. Her voice was steady, but her heart was racing. Daniel didn't speak at first, but she could feel him watching her, waiting. He knew what this meant, even if she hadn't said it yet. "I can't keep fighting," she said finally, her voice breaking slightly. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being part of a war that has no end, no purpose. I'm not a weapon. I don't want to be a weapon anymore." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Tessa was afraid. Afraid of how Daniel would react, afraid that she had made a mistake, afraid that her decision would tear them apart. But when she turned to face him, she saw something she didn't expect: understanding. Daniel smiled, a small, warm smile that reached his eyes. "You don't have to be. You can be whatever you want, Tessa. You've already taken the first step. You've chosen peace." Tessa felt a wave of emotion crash over her. It wasn't relief, not yet, but it was something close to it. She wasn't sure where her path would lead, or what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was making a choice for herself, not for the empire, not for the war. For herself. The war was still out there, still raging between their people. But Tessa knew now that she didn't have to be a part of it anymore. She had a choice, and for the first time, she was choosing peace. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, whether her decision would make any difference at all in the grand scheme of things. But as she looked at Daniel, standing beside her, she realized that the future didn't have to be about bloodshed. It could be about something more. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something better,